I started the Friends You Haven't Met podcast to tell the stories of the most interesting, talented, and impact-driven people I meet. My friend today is a writer, leader, and social impact entrepreneur who believes that the path to a better, more sustainable future lies in reframing our relationship with technology, reconnecting with nature, and using technology for a good in a way that it hasn't been used before. After selling his first startup at 28 years old, a 6-week trip to his lush home state of Vermont shed light on the severity and destruction of climate change. This experience would lead to an impassioned pivot towards social engagement, his new startup called Shock the System, and the community action app Be, which launched exclusively in Vermont in May. I'm thrilled and humbled to be telling the story of one of the most passionate people I know, and I really believe he's going to change the world one day. Saul Costa, welcome to Friends You Haven't Met. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Ace. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, well, I should be saying that. I'm excited to be here in this beautiful home here in Vermont. It's my first time, so thanks for hosting us. It's beautiful here.
Absolutely.
So, lots to talk about, and we're going to just get right into this. So, Saul, you're on a mission. What is that mission?
I think to distill it down, I'm working on a lot of things, right? But the underlying theme is essentially trying to reframe people's relationships with nature, connect them to a world that exists all around them, that we've formed these disconnects with really quite recently, actually. And I believe that through that, we can end up in a place where we have the bounties of nature delivered to us and a lot fewer problems than the ones we find ourselves in right now. So yeah, it really comes down to kind of just rethinking our relationships with nature in the context of the modern world that we live in now, both in terms of the advantages and also the challenges that we face today.
And where did this problem come from in terms of systemic and institutional factors? Like, what led us here?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of Western ideology, very exploitive, and I think that expanded very rapidly alongside the development of technology, and that fundamentally can be something as simple as ships that could go further, right? And the position that we've ended up in is largely a result of that unchecked desire to take from nature, from others. And that's depressing to consider by itself that we've kind of ended up in this position. But one thing that really excites me a lot is when you look back, this is actually only somewhere we've been for a very recent period of time, a few hundred years, which is relatively speaking not that long at all.
Mm-hmm. And when you say technology, are you referring to anything more specific? Is it just technology as like the concept of tools that help us in our society, or is there anything?
Yeah, I mean, because you could call technology the first stones that we picked up, right? And sharpen the sticks. The way that I look at technology is really through the lens of our relationship with it. And I think technology for a long time was a series of advancements that helped us shape our culture, allowed us to create larger societies. But at a certain point, we started to shift and use it beyond, I guess you could say, use it beyond its intended means. And the technology that I think has really landed us in the position that we are in today results from a more recent, the scientific revolution, essentially, is kind of where this all started to pick up. Mm-hmm. And it's this concept of, technology that's created from breaking down a system into its tiny components and then building it back up in the image that we would like to see. Like when we showed up and tried to insert ourselves into technology, I think that's really where the issues started to crop up.
I see.
Yep. So it's been kind of like a series, right? We've got the really early stuff, then kind of the technology that unlocked the modern world, you could say. And then the next big step after that was communication technology. And that really ramped things up. When you look back at history, if you consider the war before radio communication, we couldn't fight big wars, right? Because we couldn't talk to each other. And so as we developed these technologies, yes, it gave us the ability to share stories and communicate with each other over long distances. But unfortunately, when you look at the uses of modern technology, it tends to come down to people using it to make money and kill people. Mm-hmm. And but that doesn't mean that's all technology needs to be. That's just the way that where we are right now.
Who's responsible for this problem? a lot of people,
Yeah.
talking about society and businesses and people in power.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could actually trace it back probably to early Western philosophy, right? There's this concept of I think, therefore I am. And what we've done is essentially, from that point, what you're effectively saying is existence is based on the mind. And that has led us to a point where we overvalue the application of the mind, especially our conscious minds, and kind of that breaking down in systems and reassembly of it. But when you distill down the cultures that have existed over the last few thousand years and you look at them within that context, it very quickly becomes evident that this Western approach, the European kind of expansion, is what framed technology for us in the modern world. But that's only been a few hundred years of that relationship.
So for a problem that's so layered and nuanced and interconnected with our with society,
Yep.
over, as you say, at least the last few hundred years, what does your solution to that even start to look like?
Yeah, you have to think big, right? Because big problems. Mm-hmm. But I think ultimately what we lack right now, and the thing that I'm on a mission to address, is twofold. It is reshaping the relationships that we have through nature through a process of altering the systems that have drawn us away from nature and allowed us to damage the natural world. And that's really something that has to be systemic, and that has to come from the people, that has to work through the proper channels to adjust these real world systems that govern govern our lives. And so that's a big problem, right? And that's going to take a lot of work. But I'm also a big believer in the power of education. And when I think about the relationship that I would like to see people having with nature, it comes down to respect and appreciation. So to get nature respected, we have to change those systems, right? We have to make those adjustments. But to appreciate nature, you just need to educate people on the importance of it, the nuances, give them the knowledge and the understanding that they need to appreciate all of the tiny things that is happening around them. And I think if you can make nature something that's special to individuals through educating them, that will have a natural force on the systemic issues that we also need to address. So it's a big problem, but we can start small by learning more about the world that's all around us.
Mm-hmm. What are these systems you keep referring to? And I know this is going to be a big answer.
Yeah, but. No, I mean, there's actually just one system, right? Mm-hmm. Like when we look at our financial and our power systems, are the two things that govern this. And, it's very clear, especially today, that those are completely intertwined with one another and absolutely inseparable. But the systems that have been stood up are largely a result of thinking about the world in a few very specific ways. Mm-hmm. And we've used these systems to scale, in our own view, what the world should look like. And that's from everything from the ability to drive down the road and buy gas, jump onto Amazon, the ability for a government to use drones to wipe somebody out. So it's an embedded framework that we needed to get to where we are, in a sense, right? Like all of that enabled the level of the modern comforts in many cases and the convenience and so forth. But at the end of the day, it needs some work, right? Mm-hmm. It needs some adjustments.
Mm-hmm. Of the numerous problems of our time, why the personal investment in the natural world as opposed to, say, homelessness, poverty? What's your personal investment in nature and your mission towards it? Yeah,
I mean, I'm very fortunate to have had a intimate relationship with nature from childhood, very, very early childhood. I can't remember an age when I didn't know something about nature that made me happy and made me appreciate it. And a significant portion of that was due to growing up in Vermont, 25 minutes up the road. We're on the other side of the mountain we've been staring at. And it's 12 acres, mostly wooded forest, some big fields. And, we had some animals there on the farm and stuff like that. But I was homeschooled. And so as a kid, we'd wrap up school at, noon, 1 p.m. And next thing we were doing is just running around outside, ripping apart tree roots and building these huge fern forts and all that type of stuff. And so it's hard to pull back from something like that when it's really been so deeply integrated. And from there, as a child, really had those experiences. I would say starting my professional career, a lot of focus on my work and less of a relationship there. But then returning to Vermont over the past few years has very much awakened that passion and all of those feelings. Like nature is something that we can understand and we can examine it, right? But the beauty of nature is that it can elicit feelings within us. I mean, like literally scientifically even speaking, smelling dirt releases serotonin, it just blows my mind, right? So you have to think about being a kid and, being out planting rows of corn and stuff like that in this beautiful dark Vermont soil. And you literally become almost addicted to it in a sense, because it's really shaping you through the impact that it's having on your soul, your mind, your body, all of it.
I want to know about your upbringing. So taking it way back, I want to know where you came from, where your values come from. How does that story go?
It's quite the story. Yep. But I think the most formative elements of my childhood were definitely the lack of being out at school, right? Being homeschooled, which ultimately led to situations that required a lot of teaching myself things. I grew up the oldest of 6 kids, and so when you've got one, maybe sometimes 2 people teaching 6 kids, you're just kind of left on your own a bit to figure things out. And so that developed a lot of really valuable early skills. But another element for me is that my parents chose to homeschool me and my siblings, but they also completely cut us off from the outside world. We had no idea what was happening. And it literally until, it was like a later teenage and then started to see the news because, we didn't have internet until I was 14. And so I had no idea what was happening out there. And I think the values really derive from an understanding of myself, which was made possible because I showed up in the real world that we all are living in with a blank slate, and not even, I wouldn't know if you say a blank slate, but really with a view of the world that had been customized for me by my parents, and it was in sharp contrast to reality. So when that kind of came, those crashing together of the world I was told existed in the actual world, it put me in a position where I very early on had to start asking myself, okay, do I want to be a part of this world, or do I want to be a part of changing this world to make it more like the better one that I was told for my entire existence was the one that I should expect.
What's your relationship like with the rest of your family, your other 5 siblings?
Yeah, it's good. There's the dynamics of any family, and when we were kids, there were enough of us to actually have like cliques in the house, which was kind of fun. But we very, very frequently get together and just share memories and express gratitude for the experiences we were able to have together as children. And it's honestly that those connections that we formed exist to this day. And yeah, I absolutely love being a member of my family. It's really something incredible.
Yeah. So homeschooled here in Vermont.
Yep.
How'd you end up in the tech world?
Yeah, so it started way back when I was a kid, and it was about 8 years old, and I wasn't allowed to have any video games in the house or, any movies, music, like totally nothing.
Here's a stick. Yeah.
No, literally. No, it's totally. My toy as a kid for a long time was just like a 6-foot stick that I would just vault around in the backyard. So, but one day I was, sitting at the computer. Dad comes home. He was researching and teaching at University of Vermont. He comes home, it's dark winter night, and he hands me a floppy disk, which I don't know if you still remember those things. Yeah, right. It's like archaic at this point. But he handed me a floppy disk, and he said, if you want to make video games, or if you want to play video games, make them yourself. And shoved it in the computer and I opened it up, and there were these games that were written in a programming language that I was very quickly able to pick up and start making adjustments to those games. And so tech entered my life at a very, very early age. And it stayed there, I think maybe because of the effort I had to put in to incorporate it into my life, because, old computer, no video games and no internet, no books on any of this stuff. So it's like you had to work to learn that. And it clicked, honestly. Like, I think my brain just likes to think in technology ways. And so over time, though, started to recognize that technology isn't intrinsically valuable. And I think that's a misconception we have, is that technology makes things better. We're now just starting to understand that that's really not the case. But that naturally evolved as I moved out to Silicon Valley, into a desire to solve real world problems with technology. And that's been kind of the theme so far since then, is what's the real problem and how does technology fit into solving that in healthy ways?
When you moved out to San Francisco, this is what, right after high school? You went there for college?
Moved there after college.
After college?
Yep. Went to Norwich University, studied computer science, and then moved out there in 2014. Yep.
Did you have something lined up, or did you just go see Silicon Valley in 2014, which was peak, peak
it was really going
era? Yeah. You just went out there, tried to do something?
I was fortunate. I guess technically I went out there in 2013 as well. I did an internship with a startup, and then they wanted me to stay, and they're like, we don't care, you don't have a college degree, like we actually kind of like that. And so it was a hard choice to go back to school, and I had 2 years left at that point, and I was like, all right, I'm giving myself a year to wrap this up. And so I just like pounded it out, and then went back, joined the same startup, and then very quickly, within like literally a month, founded the startup that I would eventually, or that I would then work on for the next about 6 years.
That must have been a culture shock, I mean, coming from a homeschooled farm background in Vermont and then other way across the country.
Yeah, it really was. But honestly, it was what I was looking for at the time. Really needed to kind of expand beyond the community that I grew up in and reestablish, put myself in a position where I could really define myself as opposed to define myself through the lens of the community that I was in. There was nothing wrong with that community, but I needed to go out into the world and learn more about myself. And it was a shock, but the great thing is that it was exactly what I needed at that time. Like I remember showing up and probably was wearing some farm boy equivalent of something, and like just, t-shirt my mom bought me way back or whatever. And within weeks, it's like the dark washed jeans and the startup t-shirts and just everybody there had that like tech entrepreneurial mind. And so for me at that point in my life, it was honestly exactly what I was looking for.
I feel like it would be really shocking to go from like here to a city.
Definitely. That was the hard part. And so I actually didn't end up living in San Francisco. I lived in a little island that they carved off of Oakland called Alameda. And that helped a lot because, when you grow up you're on 12 acres, but you're also out in the middle of nowhere. You don't see like cars, you don't hear anything. There's like no city noises at all. And so honestly, it was mostly just the noise that really got to me. That was kind of the main thing. And I know we'll talk about it at some point, but that kind of also started to trigger some issues with mental health struggles I was having at the time. And so there were definitely things that I had to adjust to. But overall, I would say I found myself right where I needed to be.
Before we go into Shock and B and all the things you're working on now, I want to talk about the mental health journey. You mentioned that it started around this time. I understand that college into your first startup and then the eventual, sale, that whole era was pretty formative, not just professionally, but your values had developed pretty significantly. It was just such a formative time as a young adult. Can we talk about your mental health journey during this time?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I've had kind of an arc to my life, even though I'm only 33, and some of the darker times included my aunt being murdered by her ex-boyfriend when I was 14, viciously.
Oh my gosh.
And then my dad dying very quickly and poorly from pancreatic cancer 6 years later. And the first one of those, my aunt being murdered, really started to trigger like a kind of mood disorder that was expressed through what they call hypomania. And this was partly due to my family having historically like a predisposition to these types of mood disorders, but it wasn't super serious, right? However, the unfortunate thing is that full bipolar disorder, which is what I was eventually, bipolar 1 disorder is what I was eventually diagnosed with, is triggered in your early 20s, late teens, early 20s. And it's triggered by trauma.
Okay.
So it was kind of like a 1-2 punch, effectively. The loss of my dad at 20 is what pushed me over the edge into full-blown bipolar 1 disorder, although I wouldn't figure that out for another 5 years. And I would really say that was the roughest point, was that 20 to 25, where struggling with a mental health issue that I hadn't even identified in myself and nobody identified, around me. So at 20, about 25, went in, got diagnosed, and started medicating it. And it's still a journey. It's still something I struggle with all the time. And I know that that's not going to change. I'm always going to have to be careful in monitoring my moods and thinking about, the decisions that I make when I'm in a very intense state, because that's really when you do the damage with bipolar. But it's been really interesting, especially after the sale of the startup. I kind of pivoted a little bit from addressing it as a mood disorder, which is kind of the traditional approach to taking care of bipolar, and began looking at it through the lens of what they call executive functioning. Executive functioning is essentially the strength of your conscious mind, and bipolar weakens your conscious mind and weakens your executive functioning. It basically makes you out of control. And so I started looking at bipolar through that lens of my moods are, stabilized, but how can I strengthen my mind so that in the times when the inevitable intensity, what they call mania, does kick in, I can keep the train on the tracks and kind of control that. And that was kind of an eye-opening experience for me, because it shifted my bipolar 1 disorder from an issue in my life that I was treating to really being able to express some of the beautiful parts of having a mental illness, which is that disassociation from reality to an extent that ends up becoming valuable in certain situations when you want to look at reality from a detached state. And I did that strengthening of the conscious mind, primarily actually using a brain training technique called neurofeedback, where you effectively just sit down, put on a EEG swim cap, and watch Netflix. And as you're doing it, the computer detects if your mind is drifting, and if it does, it dims the screen, and then your mind corrects and it lightens it again. And what's really amazing is that neurofeedback actually changes your physical brain, your neurological connections, and makes you, gives you that greater sense of control, whereas a medication-only approach really is just, it's kind of a Band-Aid, effectively. So it's been interesting, and I feel really fortunate that after the startup, I had a significant amount of time where I could really focus on my mental health, and some really positive things came out of that.
You mentioned hypomania.
Yep.
What is that? So
hypomania is effectively you have super high levels of energy. You are going to be out there, kind of you've got your rapid speech, kind of a flow of ideas coming through. But the problem is that you start to express antisocial behavior, essentially, because you're in an elevated state and you kind of don't care about other people, because you're well, I'm amazing, so why do I even need other people? And then mania is essentially the worst version of that. And so mania when people think of bipolar disorder, what they usually think of is up and down and up and down and up and down.
Yeah.
And that's one type of bipolar disorder, which they call bipolar 2 disorder. But the type that I have, which is bipolar 1, is like way too far up and then like maybe a little down, way too far up and then maybe a little down. And so you're not depressed and making decisions because you're sad, but you're doing it in this state where you're flying high, you're flying too high. And thoughts that you start to think about things and make decisions in a mind that is not under your control, in a mind that is not your own. And so like one of the worst impacts of that, for example, is just flat out disregarding your relationships with others, breaking up with somebody that you actually love, but at the time you're like, this person means nothing to me because I'm God. And then same thing with, spending money that you shouldn't have spent. And so hypomania is kind of, like some of the physical manifestations of it, but mania is really when you start to lose control of your mind, literally.
You mentioned the start of this was when your aunt was murdered.
Yep.
How old were you then?
14.
And you got diagnosed at 25?
25, yep.
How did you even, because it sounds like as you're describing it, it sounds like you're describing a high energy person that might just be disconnected from, like, say, a breakup. They're just not reacting how one would think, right? How did you even find out that you had bipolar 1 disorder? Like that, is that hard to diagnose?
It's absolutely hard to diagnose. And so bipolar is interesting and literally deadly in the sense that it consumes your identity. And what I mean by that is that you begin to believe that the mania is what makes you special and what lets you do all of the things you're accomplishing. And to some extent, there are positive elements to mania. Like I like to write, and when you are in that elevated, intense state and you can channel that into your writing, which I also did after my aunt died, I wrote 2 novel-length fantasy books to just like process effectively. And that was when, I remember it really starting to looking back now and thinking, okay, there's these white lights kind of coming in, and just remembering my mind at that point definitely kind of ties into all of it. But no, so bipolar is basically impossible to self-diagnose because you believe that you are it and that the mania is the best part of you. And so what ultimately happened is the woman who would eventually become my wife, we met when I was 24, and she had a degree, she has a degree in psychology. And immediately she, was like, you need to go get checked, man.
First date things.
more or less. And, but, even after that, it still took time because you don't want to admit that the thing you think is the best part of you is mental health issue. You don't want to give that up. And ultimately, I didn't do it for myself because I was like, hell yeah, I want to keep my mania. But I started to recognize the same patterns that had devastated previous relationships pop up again. And that combined with her input recognized like, okay, there's something here. And then went in and it was like, yep, bipolar, cool. And, did a full neuropsych assessment to just like really confirm that it was the case. Had another one completed 5 years later that also double confirmed it. So I know I'm bipolar and, clinically bipolar. So.
Is it genetic?
So bipolar is typically genetic. Yeah. And so you can have a genetic predisposition to it, but there needs to be typically like an environmental trigger, like a trauma occurring around that time frame of late teens to early 20s. There's other people in my family, kind of, ancestral that didn't get diagnosed at the time because mental health had a lot of stigmas at that point. Right. But being somebody who has learned a lot about mental health through my own journey, I can easily say, yeah, you were bipolar. You're at least you had some type of severe mood disorder.
Yeah. For more openly discussed mental health topics, like let's take anxiety. Fortunately, the stigma around that has changed pretty significantly. I feel like a lot of people are open to talking about that. There's discourse around ways that can be turned into a strength or otherwise, harnessed in a certain way. Did you find that to be the case with bipolar 1 disorder? Have you harnessed those intense highs to, achieve some goal or in some positive way?
Yeah, no, I would say absolutely. Like I said, the writing is a huge element of it. But there are moments where intensity can be good. Like if you're building a startup and you gotta freaking do, 18-hour days over and over and over again, you need to like put your mind into that intense state. But I would say that in general, unchecked mania is much less productive than you believe it to be while you are manic, because you might be pounding out a bunch of code or making some decisions around financial things that you think are just like the coolest and best things ever. It's like best idea, and then it's not, and then you go back later and you're like, I got to throw away this code, I got to get myself out of debt. So in general, like by default, mania is more dangerous than it is anything else. And by dangerous, I'll quantify that. So bipolar has the highest suicide rate out of all mental illnesses, except for schizophrenia, which has the same rate. And up to remember these numbers, up to 1 in 3 people attempt bipolar. Attempt to kill themselves, and a significant portion of them succeed. So it's like, and what people don't really recognize about the dangers of bipolar and self-harm is that most people think to kill yourself you have to be sad, and that's where it comes from. Bipolar, not the case. It's about that weakness in your conscious mind, about losing control. So you can go from on top of the world to attempting to kill yourself in an instant. Yep, because you just lose control of your mind. And so,
do you feel that oscillation as it's happening? Like you mentioned, you can go from high to low in a snap.
Yeah.
What's your experience with that?
It's hard, man. Honestly, it's really hard to catch it until you're in it. And there are certain triggers you can watch for, but even to this day, I struggle sometimes to acknowledge those triggers and to stop and recognize, like, I am manic. Yeah. And I had a manic episode just a few months ago that was honestly the worst I've had since I started medication. And there was a huge number of factors that tied into that, that luckily very rarely all come together like they would then. But just to kind of list a few of those, it's like, had to do some 19-hour driving days, was using a huge amount of caffeine, which I never do, exited the keto diet at that time, which keto actually, one of its primary things is its ability to balance the same chemicals in your brain that the medications do. So it was basically dropping a medication effectively. And, I was driving across country, so shifting time zones, and it hit me hard. It lasted like 6 weeks, and that's a long time for me. And it took at least half of that to recognize there was something up. And literally, I had people telling me, I think you might be manic, and it just doesn't go in your ears because you kind of want to be,
right? And it's that disconnection from conscious subconscious, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's go back to San Francisco. Joined the tech industry, got into that space. Walk me through how we got to shock the system.
Yeah. So it was an intense time, like spending years, or age 22 through 28, working on a startup that just consumed my life more or less. But it was a really meaningful problem to work on. Basically, we created some technology that allowed people to get hands-on experience with different tech skills, much easier than typical, which helped unlock learning experiences for students in computer programming, web development, data science, those types of fields. So it was a really cool product to work on, and but quite the journey. And ultimately, that journey ended in San Diego in very early 2021 with the sale of the startup. And and so that, of course, it ended well, put me in a position of being able to effectively choose whatever the hell I wanted to do with my life from that point forward. And it took some time, really started to figure out who I was, then began to look at the world, study the world, read history, read economic texts, read philosophy, try to figure out where are we right now, right? Like, and how did we get here? And then that naturally led, I had an experience here in summer of 2022, I believe, just really reintegrating with nature in a way that I hadn't since I was a child. And being in Vermont, I'd been gone now for 10 years, and so there were these stark environmental changes that you just couldn't miss. You know, the invasive species coming in, the floods now, so much hotter than it used to be, and I decided I want to do something about this, and that was kind of what triggered specifically the learning about the world, but ultimately recognized I needed to enter the nonprofit space, but also bring my own perspective and set of experiences that has allowed me to create organizations within the for-profit space. And Shock is effectively the result of that.
Yeah. And Shock is it's a new startup, but it's the umbrella, right? You have the B app, which just launched, a Vermont exclusive back in May.
Yep.
The intent is to create technology that will empower people to, how would you put it? Not use technology, use technology less, or that reframing that you were talking about before.
Yeah, so Shock, we create what we like to call reality tech. And reality tech is essentially tools that get people off of their screens and back out into the real world.
Okay.
Right, the real world still exists. Facebook only came out 20 years ago. Like, we can still go back out into it, but unfortunately the way that we've seen technology show up so far hasn't optimized for that, because it wants people to be seeing ads effectively and buying things. And so B is an app that makes it easy to do good in your community. It's effectively your community bulletin board, but displayed on a map. So very place-based, very easy to find what's happening around me, community events, but also volunteer opportunities, ways to jump in and help out in your community, but in the real world. So that's really the first manifestation of the overall Shock philosophy of reality tech. Yep.
I want to know more about that philosophy. So I think what you just described to me sounds not too different from, say, like Facebook groups or, any number of existing platforms that facilitates people connecting through some shared goal, right? In this case, it is community action, right? How is it different?
I think one of the main things is that it's an aggregation point. So when we go out and we work with nonprofits who are, for example, trying to recruit volunteers, it's the platforms they're trying to do it on are very distributed, and they're operating within silos. So one individual who is down to help out a nonprofit because they're aware of that nonprofit in a specific way may only come into contact with that nonprofit. And so if there's a similar organization that could also use similar help, that person's not even going to know about it. And that's really unfortunate, because our hypothesis behind B, that's we've validated with research and now real life interactions, is that people want to help. They want to show up in their community. They want to do good. So the problem isn't the desire. The problem is that we don't have the right tools to be able to do that. Something like Meetup, something like Facebook groups, they're very focused on events that they want to that they want to host. B is more of an actionable activity that is going to be happening in the real world.
Leading up to B, you came back to Vermont. I think it was like a 6-week kind of personal retreat. You just dug into, history, the world. You were reading a lot.
Yep.
If I were to consider changing the world in this way, changing the way people think, reframing technology, I'm curious how you landed at community action as the first step. Were there other angles? Like, could you give insight into your approach of saying the first thing is to give people tools to organize amongst themselves, as opposed to I don't know, lobbying or all those other methods?
Honestly, we started in the activism space at the time, especially given what I was reading about, and it's hard to find good stories in history, like it really is. And so I was consuming just a lot of information about the world that was really just making me angry. And so the initial idea was actually to facilitate activism, protests, boycotts, things like that, but then really recognize that there's already enough anger in the world and people shouting about the way that things are, and that the true opportunity was to approach it from a perspective of hope, and to recognize that the systems that we've historically pushed up against are now in a state of deterioration. And I believe that we're going to watch those systems transition into a state that we really can't even have imagined until we see it, unless you read history and you recognize that those transitions happen. So understanding that the world is shifting and that we're here, and that, but also believing that a better world is possible, started to recognize that the real opportunity was to bring people together through a lens of hope and to build the systems that are going to come after the ones that are now failing us. And that's really what B is. It's a system. It's a simple app. You can load it and it looks basic. It's easy to use, but it's a very powerful paradigm shift where, previously it was, well, I want to go post on the community bulletin board, or, oh, I'm going to go use this like horrific, difficult to use volunteer management software. And both of those things have their places, but the problem is that it doesn't solve the need for people who just want to show up on a Tuesday at 4 p.m. They don't want to have to go through a volunteer. They don't want to have to do the hour-long application and get checked and then have to commit 6 weeks of time to it.
Yeah.
And so B is, it's essentially it's a paradigm shift that sits right in the middle and enhances a lot of the efforts that are already there, but by providing a tool that unlocks new systems.
And it launched in May, a Vermont exclusive.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. We had a really great launch. Kind of brought together a lot of community leaders throughout the state and did a summit down in central Vermont. And then, basically, I think it was early June, we pushed it to the app stores. And now we've been going out to all the farmers markets and just like community events and just being present and handing out free merch and stuff like that. And the feedback has been fantastic. It really, really is. It's a marketplace of, opportunities to be present in your community and the individuals who we need to be present. So building that up is going to take time, right? But we have an incredible team who's really knocking it out of the park, and so far so good.
Is that why you launched with a summit? Because that's a unorthodox way to launch an app at all. Was the idea to just get the audience together and have that in-person experience? Pretty much,
yeah. So Shock was founded October of 2023.
Okay.
And we didn't start building B until early this year. And all the time in the middle was just figuring it out. So it was like 4 months effectively of app development. And what we decided to do is like, okay, well, we can either come into communities, real world communities, and think that we know what they need and build that and give it to them and try to get them to use it. Or we can come out and we can say, hey, we exist. We have a foundation for this app. What do you need? What can be added to this? What needs to be changed? And to get that input as early as possible. And we're very fortunate that Vermont is full of wonderful people and organizations who, even in our very, very early stage, have been so supportive of our work, really dedicating their time and sharing us with their networks. And so it's been a very natural integration, I would say. I really don't think we're coming in and saying do it our way. We're coming in and saying, here's a tool that can help you do what you're doing better in a few different ways.
Is there a concern around B being used in a way that it's intended to be, but for a cause that could be politically divisive or political leaning? Because I understand it's intended to be non-political as a tool, right? So I guess what is to stop someone from gathering for, I'm not even going to mention anything by name, but you know what I mean? Totally. Like who's choosing the campaigns, and like, how is there a concern around that?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question and something we've been very intentional about from the start, because we recognize that just like all technology, it can be used for good and for bad, and we would really like to see be used for good.
Yeah.
So there's two ways we've been tackling that. First, there's some explicitly disallowed types of activities. So you touched on politics, but anything that is like ultimately extremely partisan as well. And then anything that is a paid event effectively so all the things you're going to show up on for B are going to be free. However, it gets much more nuanced than that. So there's these data structures effectively that are called a taxonomy. Okay. And taxonomies are just kind of like a tree of information. And we've created this taxonomy to govern the allowable use cases for B. And what we did is we actually tied it back to Schock's values, which are community empowerment, environmentalism, and education. So we created this taxonomy that derived from those, where effectively it's like, okay, environment, for example, one of the elements in the taxonomy is dealing with invasive species.
Okay.
And then that can distill down even further to specific types of invasive species and so forth. But that taxonomy is intended, we kind of put in the initial ideas, worked with an incredible taxonomist to, it's a real taxonomy. It's fully validated and everything. It's really cool. But the intention is to evolve that over time with input from the communities, so they can say, hey, this is what we need, this is what we would like to use B for, does this belong in the taxonomy? And then there's processes that you can go through to ensure alignment and so forth. So we're pretty explicit with what we allow in there. If it doesn't exist in the taxonomy and it's not going to be a fit, you're not allowed to do it. And at the same time, we take a very structured approach to approving new hosts on the app. Mm-hmm. So you can't just sign up and host a thing. You actually have to apply, and the application's really simple, and most of them are yeses, but we do a record check and stuff like that. So mm-hmm. we're really trying to create a space that is safe and also predictable, right? Mm-hmm. We want people to go on and know what they're going to find on B.
What kinds of things are people doing on there now? Because it's active, right?
Yeah.
Here in Vermont, people are gathering, and what are they doing?
Yeah, there's been a few really cool environmental ones. There was one I went to. I like going to these activities. It's so much fun.
Yeah, let's check one out.
And so there was one that literally was just they had a park, and this was down in Waitsfield, and the park needed to be cleaned and mowed and all of that, and they put it on B, and then people are there. Mm. And so there's been that. There's been some farmers market support coming through. So yeah, some pretty cool volunteer opportunities. And then at the same time, we've been ensuring that there's kind of a baseline of things on B. So having all the farmers markets on there, and kind of checking out what's happening in communities already, and trying to bring all of that onto B. Mm-hmm. So, but ultimately the thing that we want to see as the primary use case for it is the volunteer element and the mutual aid element. Mm-hmm. One specific example that we are working with municipalities and people that have experience in this space is around flooding, for example. So when we have a flood, how do we all show up quickly on behalf of each other? Yeah. And that's really, I think, where we're going to see B's power, is that ability to activate and get something done. And that might literally be, the side of the road needs to be cleaned. It could be something as simple as that, but there's also some very powerful instances where it's very valuable to be able to coordinate effort and align people around objectives in moments.
Right. Why Vermont?
So yeah, it's interesting. I read a Vermont history book not long ago called Vermont: A History by this guy, Charles Morrissey, who actually lives in this town. And it was interesting because there are many elements of B that are aligned with me, effectively, right? Mm-hmm. I showed up, had this idea for this app that was based on a lot of research. This isn't just the type of thing that it was let's build an app, right? But as I was reading this history book, I recognized that a lot of those things that I thought were elements of my identity were actually elements of Vermont's identity. And as a result of that, because I grew up in Vermont, it made that expression through the app made it a really, really good fit here. So that was one element of it. Speaking more on Vermont itself and why it's the place for it, Vermont actually has, I believe it's the highest volunteerism rate in the country. Yep. Yeah. People who have actually gone out and volunteered. It's a state of 700,000 people. We're pretty far away from a lot of what's happening in some crazy places. And so we kind of need to take care of ourselves, and more as well. So it's that general community-based culture. Vermont is just a natural community environment. People are already showing up and doing the types of things that we want to see more of with B and make it easier to do with B. So it was just honestly a perfect fit. Yeah.
What were those traits that you said were parts of the identity of Vermont and then by proxy?
Yeah, I would say the environmental element is huge. You know, people are very passionate about the environment here, and I'm absolutely right there with them. But yeah, like I think showing up on behalf of others, like Vermont still has that character where people help one another, and we've lost that in a lot of places, unfortunately. But Vermont has managed to retain it, and I think, you know, I grew up the oldest of 6 kids, so I've, you know, being the eldest sibling, like I've always been helping people, especially being homeschooled. You know, that was kind of it, and so a lot of my life has been lived trying to serve the needs of others. I'm not a selfless individual or anything like that, of course, but like I like helping people. And I think a big piece of that is because of Vermont, and B is about helping people.
Are you preparing for a larger launch? Is it national, state by state?
Yeah, we're going to go state by state is the plan. And even within Vermont, we've actually hyper focused down into what we call these pilot communities, where, you know, it's a specific town or region or something like that, where it's even more focused than the states. We kind of have like this statewide awareness of B, but then application is more targeted. But I think the way that I would like to see B evolve, and you know, I'm the founder of this organization, but I really try to let things bubble up as well. But my personal things that I could see is I would kind of like to do 2 things. One is go a place that's similar to Vermont. So you could think maybe like Colorado is pretty similar, but then also go to a place that's totally dissimilar to Vermont and learn about how B integrates in those places as well. So I think it's going to be, you know, it's going to be kind of pushing forward on new fronts, but also making use of the knowledge that we have gained already operating within the state.
So before launching Shock and then B, during that 6-week period, you know, you're reading a lot about history. One thing that jumped out to me that I read about in your book was you were honing in on social movements of recent American history. Are there key lessons or takeaways that have played into your development of the app based on reading, like, you know, let's say the civil rights movement?
100%. Yeah, that 6 weeks, it really kicked off. It kicked off a wonderful educational journey that's still progressing, and really just reminded me of how much I love learning. So it was really great. And yeah, there's been a gambit. The modern movements have a lot of really great lessons. So one thing that's really cool, if you think about the civil rights movement, that was happening in a state, a time when not everybody had a phone in their house. So, and they're still organizing so many people that they can change laws fundamentally. They had amendments done, right? So it's like, that to me is just inspiring, absolutely inspiring, to demonstrate the power of people that will come together even though they lack tools that can really facilitate that. So on a fundamental level, it really excites me to think about what a modern movement would look like if it had the right tools. But the common themes there is that you can't create a better world if you approach it through violence. If you're violent, even if you think you're right, you're going to create another violent system or government or whatever. So you have to take a peaceful approach through not engaging with the system, passive, nonviolent resistance, right? And that's worked, right? That worked with Gandhi, right? Just played out very well in situations, and then in other situations it didn't work. But he really was the pioneer of that. And so that has there were kind of 2 main themes that evolved from all this reading. It was like, the depressing one was, oh my God, things are not really changing. And when you really look at it, some of the elements of the things we have today and the power structures that have persisted actually go back thousands of years. So it's like we're living in an ancient world in some ways, in a world that hasn't caught up to the challenges and opportunities of today. And that's unfortunate, because it's like, well, okay, well, can it change, you know? And But the second learning is that it can change, and that it actually takes way fewer people than you think to apply that pressure, that systemic pressure, in whatever capacity it needs to be. The primary thing is that they need to be operating from a position of nonviolence and with aligned values. And if you can do that, it takes way fewer people than you would think, because the system functions by hiding the fact that is true. It wants you to think that it would take a full revolution, of civil war to adjust everything, and it's like, no, actually the system only it's a participatory system. And we have one side now that's really highlighting that and proving that they're not going to play by the rules. And at the same time, you have people who are now more connected than ever and could, in a very straightforward manner, apply positive pressure that could bring about substantial change. So it was definitely a two-part, why are things not changing, and things could actually change if we work together.
Yeah. That technology, though, it's a double-edged sword, right? The people in power have access to that same technology. So one example that comes to mind is just the spread of misinformation, disinformation. It's truly one of the struggles of our time. Going on the internet, not knowing what is real, and it's sowed a lot of distrust in institutions, like government at every level. It feels like we don't know what's real, what's not. We've kind of been numb to that. Are you able to speak more to how technology being so dramatically different than just, civil rights movement, much less further back, how does that change what a movement today could look like?
Yeah, I think, so you're absolutely right. The government, a lot of this technology stems from the government, actually, or operators that are aligned with the government. But it really comes down to being able to be responsive. So governments and large systems in general of any type can't move quickly. And a movement of today, you can't go up against the systems that we have and try to face them in, as coming in as another huge system with your own kind of slow moving parts to it. It really has to be something where you can say, okay, what are the opportunities here to promote positive change, and how can technology bring people together to facilitate that? So ultimately, it's a matter of coordination, and it's a matter of alignment. And I also think that this is going to require us to look at technology in new ways and to see it as a value add when increasingly it's being viewed as a detractor, or it's being presented, it's shown up in our lives as a detractor.
The entire ethos behind Shock and Be, well, it makes sense to me, but it seems to be in direct conflict with kind of everything we know, like overall business and consumer dynamics surrounding certain technologies. So if we take social media as an example and consider Meta, right? Something like 3.5 billion very willing monthly active users, and Meta, this huge company who would use all their resources to keep you on that phone. So how does that reconcile? Like, we have, on one hand, we have people that are in this dopamine loop and are habitually looking at their phone because it shows them the thing that they want, and you are coming in with a philosophy that's quite literally pushing against it, saying, like, you think the answers lie in getting off of this thing. How do we get them off of this thing? Like, how do these two things reconcile?
Honestly, I don't think they do. I really think that they exist in a state of conflict, because this is a new way of thinking about the value that technology presents in our lives. But the thing that makes me very confident that regardless of the pushback that this work will receive from the parties and the systems that don't stand to benefit from it, is that this work is driven by historical forces. So when we built this app and we take it out, what we hear all the time is, that's exactly what we need. This is the moment. This is what we need. And when you align yourself with forces of history, it doesn't matter how much money you have or how many users you have, history is going to play itself out. And I really believe that the work that we are doing is part of that forward motion of history. And it's going to be hard to stop that as as anybody or as any organization. But I think the opportunity in terms of an individual, and because this isn't just about pushing back against a system or conglomerates, monopolies or whatever, this is about changing people's hearts and minds as well. It's reframing relationships. I think the ultimate way to do that is just to get people out there, just to have that experience, because when you get off the phone and you stop reading the headlines that you have no control over anyway, and you pick up a shovel or you talk to a person face to face, we're human. There's something that happens to us when we have those interactions with people and interactions with the real world. Many times we can't even articulate it, but we can feel it, and we feel it fast. And I think that, so it's kind of like a, give them one and let that, and then see how that plays out in terms of how that changes them as an individual. Like, we're not that far away from the world. I mean, we're 33, both of us, right? Like, we were born before Facebook. Hell, we were born before the internet became publicly available. It was the same year, right, that we were born. And so we're not that far away. We used to live in the real world, and we detached from it. And I don't think that there's any reason to think that we should go back to the world that was there, because there are many exciting opportunities to apply technology in good ways like B, and to think about a future. And that future is something that we're going to have to really work to create for ourselves in the face of the major challenges that we now have. So, yeah, it's about changing hearts and minds, but it's about just reminding people that we exist in a real world and bringing back some of the best parts of the pre-meta era and the literally pre-internet era especially. I have always had a dislike for the internet, and I actually, it might sound funny because I'm a technologist, but I don't use the internet. I check my email, my calendar. I don't go on social media. I don't read the news. I literally don't go on any other websites. Like, I just don't, especially now with AI, where you can just ask a question. And it's just, I don't know. I really would love to see a world where a lot more people have that relationship with technology, because it's been very helpful, especially now, to be, sometimes I think about, like, oh, are you detached? Do you need to know what's happening in the world? And no, actually, you really just need to know about what's happening within your sphere of influence. Everything else beyond that is just what people want you to believe. You're not getting a reality that you can make informed decisions on from the news headlines or from social media, like you said. It's misinformation, across the board. So I guess that's just my pitch, is get the hell off the internet.
Let's talk about your autobiography, Endeavor, which just released in August. I had the pleasure of reading it early on. It was really an insightful story of, among many things, resilience, hope, purpose. In the book itself, you mention the oddity of I think you started at 30 years old, or 31, that you're writing a book about your life already. Why did you find it important to tell the story that was still being written, as you said? Why was it important to release this now?
I mean, ultimately, as a writer, you feel it. You feel it building inside of you, and you have to tell something. And it's actually really funny. So I started thinking about writing this book right around the start of COVID. And I thought about it a lot. I like to dream effectively, which is just thinking about the future you want, but really like trying to connect with it emotionally. And it's actually pretty amazing, because the dream I always held in my mind was like literally this, like sitting here and having this exchange with somebody. But it took some time to really talk myself through, like, is this narcissistic to write a memoir about your life at, in your 30s? Like, what the hell? And then I started breaking down my life, and it was like, I've lived a lot, and I've had a number of unique experiences, a number of challenging experiences, many of which people don't face in their life. And ultimately, I think the reason I decided to start it was that I needed to integrate those back into my understanding of myself. So when you read the book, and you probably picked up on this, is the first chunk of it, the first 80% or so, is just reads like a big journal entry, and some of it was fueled by journal entries.
Yeah.
And but really the intent was to process my childhood all the way through the acquisition, which is traumatizing in its own ways. And I wrote that in 3-4 months. It just popped out.
Wow.
And then the rest of it took over a year to just know what I needed to say.
Yeah.
And the result of that was needing to experience personal growth that helped me evolve as an individual and give me time to reflect on that person that I was becoming. And that's, that took some time, and I only finished writing it this past fall, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
were there parts of your life journey that surprised you as you reflected on it, after the fact throughout the writing process, as in, insights that you didn't realize before, new lessons learned, things that you would have only caught in retrospect if you were writing about it?
Yeah. So I sold my startup at 28 for $40 million, and bought a nice house, just kind of, I like to think that I don't go overboard and materialism or whatever, but I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get a nice house, get a couple of nice cars, right? And so people would walk up to the house to drop off a thing or something like that, or whatever, friends or anything, and they always had the same question, which is just, what do you do? Like, how do you do this? And my answer was like, I don't know. And so I decided I've got to write a book to answer that question. And I didn't have the answer. It took me almost 2 years to find the answer. And so, yeah, and the insights, I would say, were less, it was less that first 80%, that like personal element. For me, that was really processing my life. Yeah. And I tell people all the time, like, I would throw that book in the trash and I would still have gotten all the value out of it, because I wrote it for me. But then the last 2 parts of the book is really where I start to talk about, my experiences as, like during a period where I was able to focus on myself and my mental health and physical health, and reflecting on, what worked, what didn't work there. But the very last part is basically a presentation of the journey through my mind to a like more or less like a spiritual belief system. Yeah. And those were things that absolutely did not know until I wrote them. Got it.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Once I hit that stride, I pretty much finished it in the sitting. I found particularly your exploration of subconscious mind, conscious mind, that was a fascinating element of the book, tied into some key moments throughout your life where you got insight to answers that you didn't know you had. Can we talk about that here? Just that whole process? So I'll reiterate for the listeners, but throughout the book you talk about several key moments where the answer presented itself to you when you needed it most. So the first occurrence being a computer coding issue where after a night of unsuccessfully trying to find a bug, you woke up and you said it was the solution in technical terms that you can understand was in your head. Yep. And it wasn't one of the first thoughts. It was the first thought, and you could not track back how you would have gotten there, but you woke up and you knew. And this was the first of several instances that you recognized as a pattern. Eventually you honed in on it, would go on to test it, and it sounds like you're now harnessing it to to your own needs. So can you tell me more about why you began exploring this facet of your mind? So like, I just want to know those key instances. What were they? How did you even begin to realize, oh, this is something I should explore? Because then it starts to get spiritual, and it all ties back into the natural world, as in the natural state of things. But there's a lot of questions there. But I just wanted to open up that topic, and it was fascinating. Let's talk about it.
So I'm fortunate in the sense that even though I wasn't diagnosed with a mental health issue until later in my life, in my early teens, I did start to recognize that my brain worked a little bit differently. And as a result of that, started paying a lot more attention to how my mind functions. And so I collected a lot of data just naturally over the years that put me in a really good position to start to ask some of these questions. And effectively what it came down to was recognizing that we go back to, to earlier, it's this, I think, therefore I am. It's a prioritization of the conscious mind. And the conscious mind is something that's really cool. We have it, maybe a couple of other animals have something like it, but we have used it to great effect to modify the world. And unfortunately, the conscious mind seems to be more directly connected with a sense of me, right? Like an individual, because you want to, especially certain minds, you want to apply yourself, you want to do well, right. You want to succeed. But unfortunately, we have a tendency to break things down and extract information and knowledge from those dissections, but not really appreciate and develop an understanding of the point of this application of our minds. And so I really, I started to look at certain things that were happening in my life with the coding or, even like elements of the acquisition coming together and then the writing. And I just had to ask myself, and I said, you're not doing these things, you have a role in this process, but I'm not thinking consciously and coming up with these ideas. And that led to starting to ask myself questions, or where is this coming from? And it honestly, the foundation of it was fairly straightforward to get to due to the fact that the communication was so explicitly coming from my subconscious. You're waking up, your first thought, but what was really took me some time to figure out was that I started to realize that the thoughts that would enter your brain that I labeled as being subconscious were they were entwined with feelings. It wasn't just a thought. And what was really unique about those feelings is that they were my feelings. I could recognize them, but they weren't ones that I had conceived, right? They weren't, I hadn't applied the feelings to those thoughts. The feelings had come from within. And as I examined those feelings, I realized, wow, okay, these are feelings I'm capable of, but I'm not the one experiencing them, and they're actually truer and purer feelings than the ones I can even comprehend. And that really deepened my appreciation for the value of feelings within the subconscious context, and led to a whole system of going out and asking myself questions of what is meaning, and then trying to literally visualize that alongside other mental constructs. And it was a trip. But what it effectively came down to is that although I believe our thoughts direct our conscious mind's actions in a big way, so you can ask for a thing, and I do this a lot with writing. I'm I want this book at this particular time, but I don't need it yet, and I know my subconscious is just out there writing it, right? But what I realize is that the most powerful form of communication with your subconscious is actually feelings. When you're feeling, and they're your feelings, you're speaking to your subconscious in a language that it understands, because it can also experience feelings. And in fact, I believe that is the true feelings. When we in our minds are feeling, we're doing that through a lens of what we think we feel, right? It's through the mind, not the projection of our true feelings from our inner self onto our thoughts.
How did you learn to start making that distinction as you started testing it? Because, for an uninitiated person or someone that's never considered these ideas, can you break it down even more? How did you actually start saying, oh, that feeling was my subconscious, even though I said I felt another way?
Right. Yeah. It's, I think a lot of I've always felt very in touch with my feelings. I would say in general, I'm just sensitive to that. But what really started to connect the dots is as I experienced some personal growth and healing, much of from writing the first part of this book, I became more in tune with my own feelings as I conceived them to be. And therefore, as those feelings were intertwined with the thoughts that were coming from my subconscious mind, I was able to start to better recognize them. So what I really love about that is that what that means effectively is if you're working on yourself to deepen your own understanding and your own sense of being, you're actually getting better at communicating with this incredibly powerful and special part of your mind.
And how did you tangibly start working on? Did you have like a like a sleep schedule, and you would intentionally, I don't know, get in some mindset, or what were the actual tests like, that whole process?
For like the development of this framework?
Yeah, I guess like discovering that whole thing, because
Yeah.
I think even if, I'm sure there's a lot of people that experience what you're experiencing, and they
Yep.
wake up and it's like, oh, just a dream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no communication there. It's just a dream. Wake up, go on with your day.
I think one of the fortunate things about being bipolar is you look at reality differently than everybody else, and it makes you ask questions, because when you see reality differently than most people, they're not surrounded by the natural answers that people have come up to explain the way that they see their lives, right? And so I think for me, the answers that I saw just weren't good enough. It didn't explain it for me, and these effectively profound experiences that I had, and that begged a search for deeper meaning, and that's what ultimately resulted as a part of writing the book, but then also just as a part of like just trying to take every instance of that I could recall of these interactions between the conscious and subconscious minds, and actually look for the patterns in them. Think about the dreams that I've had over the years and the common elements of those dreams, and breaking that down, identifying the patterns, and then building that back up into a system. And that took a year to do that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. For that first example, the coding example, that the solution in that wasn't an emotional one, right? Your subconscious gave you very technical information. How can that be in what you're describing? Like, does your subconscious is communicating, I guess, with your waking self, right? And then it's just doing its thing overnight?
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, your subconscious operates while you sleep, ideally. That's when the conscious mind is kind of powered down, and it can use the resources. But even with those, there were an element of feelings for sure, and they were it was interesting feelings. I'm in the depths of startup hell, and then you're like, there's no real positive emotions, that aren't immediately washed away by something. So, but with those, it was these feelings that I hadn't experienced in a while, especially, at that point had been only maybe 5 years since my dad died. So it was like still a very negative space. But there were just these positive feelings of like joy and confidence, and they were pronounced because I hadn't had those in a while. Yeah. And I consciously couldn't even at that point really experience that. And that was very encouraging to know that there was a part of me that, even in spite of the circumstances, could still be positive. Yeah.
When you were talking about your subconscious, you refer to it like a different person.
Effectively.
Is that important?
I find it valuable to do that. I very frequently say we, all the time. But yeah, I mean, I've got pretty good comms with this thing at this point. And it does what I ask, but it does it in its own ways. And when it shows up as part of my waking life, it usually brings with it something special, often in the form of a lesson about my life that I can then apply. And I do view it as, I don't know if I'd call it its own entity, but it's absolutely a very significant side of myself. And it's one that I've leaned on as I started over the years to recognize that I could apply my subconscious in these specific ways. I just think less consciously. And I do that, one, because I don't need to, but two, it's because I know that the less time I spend spinning my wheels in my conscious mind, that gives my subconscious mind that much more energy to be able to do its job itself.
Yeah. What are the limitations of your conscious mind? What are the problems that your conscious mind just can't do, and you say, hey, I'm just gonna sleep on this, let the subconscious do its thing? What are the limitations?
I mean, a lot of limitations. I'll say the first thing is that it's my belief that mental health issues exist in the conscious mind. I do not think that the subconscious mind experiences mental illnesses. In my interactions and in states of altered consciousness have very much confirmed that for me. But the conscious mind can do only one thing well, effectively, which is logic. It can connect dots in structured ways. And beyond that, it can't think very fast. It can't remember a lot for very long. And it is constantly bottlenecked by the active thoughts and the perspectives that we have had applied to our lives or applied to ourselves just throughout our development.
Just your biases, your experiences, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Okay. And so even though we each think we exist in a mind and the mind is smart, we're effectively just making up that story for ourselves. And so what that's pretty much it. It's really constrained. And then, so on the same side, right, you have the subconscious, which has direct access to all of your memories, as far as I can tell. And it has the ability to think in this expansive cognition. And that's powerful for certain types of problems, but those problems need to be pattern-based and system-based. They really can't be logical things to sort out. And it's very, very obvious when, that's the case, because very frequently, your subconscious will pitch you an idea and you're like, doesn't check out, gotta apply the logic to that. Nope. Yeah. And it's just spitting out ideas for you, and it doesn't actually know because it can't connect to reality. Yeah. And this is really why I think it's so important to prioritize the health of our conscious minds, is because our subconscious experiences reality through the consciousness. And so dreaming, I think, like wakeful dreaming about a future you want, which I talk about in the book, from what I can tell, actually kind of tricks your subconscious into believing that this is the future state, and that there are elements that it can do, things that it can do to help further that as well. But yeah, so they each have their own purposes, but I feel like we live in a society right now, and this is also a derivative of Western thought, where we over-prioritize the conscious mind. And the reason we do that is because we can see its effect on reality, and we can have a live discussion using our conscious minds. Like a subconscious is something very personal.
I'm curious, is there empirical data around this topic, conscious, subconscious communication, that kind of thing?
There's definitely well-documented facts around like the functioning of the subconscious that I've kind of built on top of. And yeah, I would say to an extent, admittedly, I have approached this through a lens of discovering myself, as opposed to taking what other people have presented and then applying that into my own framework. And it's been interesting because there have been instances where it's like, yeah, okay, this is a very kind of similar idea. I do think that I've maybe taken it to a different level in some instances, and the reason that I say that is I base a huge number of my decisions about what I need to do next in my life based on this subconscious interactions and these feelings and so forth. So yeah, I mean, I think this, number one, is something we're all capable of. Yeah. Like absolutely. It doesn't matter what your IQ is or what you've done with your life. Like we have powerful machine that developed over billions of years of evolution. When an insect, right, goes and does its thing, it doesn't decide to eat the grass because it figured the grass is good for it. It just knows to eat that grass. Right. When a bird is born and it can immediately go build a new nest, it didn't get taught by its parents. It just knows how to do that. And these are little tiny animals, right? They're doing that subconsciously. And so when you think about the human mind and the power of the human mind, really, it's like the conscious mind is just the tip of the iceberg. And regardless of the limitations of your conscious mind, if you develop that really trust-based relationship, feeling-driven relationship with your subconscious mind, I really do believe that people can unlock parts of themselves that they haven't maybe seen before. And similarly, I see this mostly through writing or other types of art. When I write, you don't know what you're going to write until you're typing it out, and then you experience it. But what's really cool is that this inner self that you can imagine consciously, but is so much bigger and grander than it's possible to actually conceive, but it's still inside of you, and the subconscious interacts with it. You get to see that self in the work that the subconscious produces. And that's been one of my favorite parts of this deepened relationship between these two parts of my mind, is as I incorporate the subconscious thoughts and ideas and works into my life, I learn more about my true self through the reflection of myself that I see in the work that's produced.
So you started from humble beginnings here in Vermont to Silicon Valley, San Diego, now back here in Vermont, for-profit, non-profit. How have your values changed over time?
I think a few years ago, I was in a position, or I was a person who was more caught up in the world of traditional success. Mm-hmm. And especially coming out of the startup acquisition where I had an early success, that really pushed me in a direction where I said, okay, built and sold a $40 million company. Can we do a $4 billion company next? Mm-hmm. And what does that look like? And really framed the work that I started doing through that lens. And when I came out here and started to reintegrate with nature, it just really helped me understand how small I am and how small we all are as a piece of this grander world that we live in, and that these pursuits that I had were misaligned with this new understanding, and that I really wanted to show up on behalf of something other than myself. I was very fortunate that at the same time, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but I basically went all the way through that. I had my basic needs met. I spent years, a couple of years thinking about myself, and I self-actualized. I figured out who I was, and then I self-transcended, and I figured out that I don't matter, and it's about showing up on behalf of others. And when I say others, I don't just mean people. I also mean the more than human world. And so, I would say it was a very significant. I don't even know if it was a shift, but it was like a return to my values as a child. I think really like a reintegration of those.
I think considering the journey you had, it sounds like you almost had to go to such, kind of extremes, like quite literally the other side of the country. And then, in the world of startup and the capitalist system, you went, did the thing, got rich, came back, and you came back and realized, like,
it just wasn't enough.
Right.
It just wasn't enough.
Wow, we're almost out of time here. So I have one last question I want to ask before we wrap up, something to tie it all together, hopefully leave our listeners with semblance of hope and something to aspire towards. But could you describe the world you hope to see in your lifetime?
I believe that the best world that we can arrive at is one where people have developed, and this takes us right back to the beginning, right? Respect for nature and an appreciation for nature. And I think once we get to that point, we're going to find ourselves in a world, we're going to realize that we're in a world that loves us and that wants to give and give and give to us, right? We go out and we spend time trying to figure out all of these new medicines that we design, from chemicals and molecules that we've discovered or engineered or whatever. We never stop and realize that the plant right in front of you can have those same benefits, right? And we're making it too hard on ourselves. So I would like to live in a world where we've reestablished these connections with nature through our respect and appreciation, and through that, nature has made us better because it has reflected our humanity back upon us and taught us about ourselves and integrated us into something that you cannot, that when you enter the more than human world, if you're really in it, you have to set aside the concept of self and the concept of your own like individualism, because you're in a system that is just so big, you realize nature actually doesn't care about you. You're just a piece of it. You're a tiny, tiny piece of it. And I think that if we get to a world where we've restructured our relationships with nature like that, we're going to live in a physically healthier world. We're going to live in a mentally healthier world. And probably we're going to find a lot of people reconnecting with their spiritual selves, because nature very frequently leads to profound experiences that even if you're an entomologist or a scientist, it's hard to explain, because the feelings and the meaning that you can derive from that is just, it defies explanation. The only hope you can do is to contemplate it and to appreciate it as a part of something that is profound and much more powerful than we are.
After people finish this podcast, where do you want them to go? Where can they keep up with you and the work you're doing?
I am on Blue Sky.
Blue Sky. Okay.
And we've got some Instagrams up for B right now. And but if you want direct from me, it's on Blue Sky.
Got it. Yep. Okay. Well, this has been incredible. Thank you again for for having me here in this beautiful space to talk about this journey. I feel like I could have kept going.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
we'll just do a round 2. So thank you so much again. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ace. This has really been incredible, and looking forward to round 2 already.
All right.